Now, in this series of stuff I like to do, I'm going to cover some things that I've been meaning to cover for a while. And this video is probably going to be a little longer than most of the videos I do because there's stuff I want to cover and I want to try to keep it all in one video. And that is the understanding that within Warrior Flow, and I had this conversation just recently with one of my instructors, we are not just a self-defense system, or although that is the intent, right, to win the fight of your life so you can go home to your family. But also, a big part of our development is developing the body. I talk about doing stuff in the body all the time, and I've been meaning to make a video to kind of bring some other stuff together so that you have a better understanding. First of all, when it comes to technique, in Warrior Flow, we really don't care. If a technique, I don't care where it comes from, works, we're all about it. And if you can make something work for you for whatever reason, you know, you have some specific talent, you got long arms like I have, whatever the case may be, if you can make it work, good for you. I mean, I don't think that, you know, you should train in a way where you don't also explore a lot of your God-given, you know, gifts. You just don't want to become overly reliant on them. You know, there's an old expression that my football coaches used to say all the time when I was in college, and that is, hard work always outworks talent when talent doesn't work hard. And some of the more recent literature when it comes to physical development, is actually pointing that out, that at the elite levels, especially as the kind of, you know, ability between one person or another kind of narrows, it really comes down to who's training properly, who's doing the things necessary to go to the next level, who's doing the things in their sport, because everything is, you know, sport specific and very domain specific, that's going to give them their edge when all things being equal. You know, if you look at the NFL or NBA and you look at all the players and you line them up by position, you know, there's not a dime's worth of difference by position between a lot of these guys. Obviously, there are a few outliers. There's always that, you know, that one offensive lineman who's got like a 40-inch vertical leap for whatever reason. You know, God bless him. But the truth of the matter is, amongst the general population, with the exception of things like size, pretty much everybody is pretty much the same. There was a recent study done with baseball players, and what they found was baseball players, when they're hitting fastballs, it's not so much that their reaction time is any better or any worse than anyone else's per se. It's their ability through training to anticipate where the ball is going to be. Or as the great Gretzky said it best, the difference between a good hockey player versus a great hockey player is a great hockey player plays where the puck is going to be. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, but also too, in order to do that, you got to develop your body, or you have to have this embodied kind of cognition to understand. So when we're training in Warrior Flow, when we're doing exercises, what we're really doing is trying to help people in the body develop to the fullest of their abilities, whatever they are, all the things they could possibly do. None of us knows what we got to do in a real situation until we're in a real situation. And so no matter how well you train, no matter what the system is, at the end of the day, you know, it's anybody's fight once, you know, things start going. But as John Farnham used to say, and I love this quote, you know, luck falls on the side of the prepared man. I'm all about being prepared. So in Warrior Flow, when we do exercises, and I'll go through the principles, you know, when we talk about balance, what we're really talking about is equilibrium control. You know, I got my balance board here, you know, signed by my mastermind. And when you're doing balance exercises, at least in Warrior Flow, the purpose is not just to stand there and show that you can stand on a board or a Bosu ball or something else. The idea is to learn how to move and do stuff on the board when your balance is compromised. And the reason is because in a real situation, you don't get to fight on the nice flat ground like I got here. You know, there's all kinds of stuff, all kinds of variations. And if you live in New York, you know that, you know, for some reason we haven't figured out how to make a level sidewalk or have a sidewalk where like parts of it aren't sticking up. Go figure. You know, the Romans can build roads that are still good and being used today, but we can't somehow pour sidewalks in that. Go figure. Anyway, so when you're moving, and you're practicing these skills while you're trying to be as perfect as you possibly can, you also have to train for, okay, so now I made a mistake. Okay, how do I recover? So it's not that I never lose my balance. It's what I do about it. So I train myself to do something about it. I train myself so if I get to a point where I feel like I'm going to lose control, my body knows how to make the adjustment on the fly. And yes, you can do that. Some people say, and especially the people who are all caught up in the gross movement crowd, that you can only do things in a fight at the gross movement level. But yet I see baseball players all the time check swinging. So the idea that you can't change or realign your body or change the attitude of your body in a real situation is just not true. How does a running back make the moves he makes? He doesn't know what he's going to do until he perceives what's going on a microsecond before he makes that move. He's doing it on the fly. Same thing with any sport, basketball, hockey, soccer, whatever the case may be. So to say people can't do that, it's just, my opinion, is just coming from the mouths of people who haven't played enough sports or haven't seen enough of this kind of stuff in their lifetime to understand there are people who can do it. I'm not saying everybody can do it. I'm just saying it can be done. So in Warrior Flow, we're always trying to challenge also our bodies. And the reason we're doing that is we're trying to develop our neurology. Because no matter how strong you are, no matter how naturally fast you may be, if you don't train your neurology, those muscles and those motor units are just not going to fire off when you need them to. So this is the reason why we'll also practice doing things with weighted objects. We first try to start off like anything else, slowly. And the reason you want to start off slowly is because you want to train the muscles. The biggest mistake that people make, and I've seen this in other arts, so I know what I'm talking about, is they practice these slow flowing movements, and you even see this sometimes in self-defense workshops or seminars where a person's developing or demonstrating as it was a self-defense move, and because everything is slow for safety, people assume that's how you're supposed to practice it. No. Eventually, you got to practice it at full speed, because the part of your brain that controls speed is separate from the part of your brain that helps you learn how to be fluid. As you kind of bring peanut butter and chocolate together, that's where, when you've practiced slowly and then you worked up to full speed, it just helps you coordinate your body better. One of the things we talk about in Warrior Flow is trying to be as smooth or as graceful in our movement as possible. And the reason for that is, in order to be smooth and graceful, you got to use your whole body. And since we fight with our whole body, everything, the kitchen sink will throw the cat on you, whatever we got to do, as we're moving and doing stuff, what we're doing is we're training our muscles where we learn how to not only move with our whole body, but control our body throughout the motion. Eventually, we start adding things like weighted objects. Why do we use weighted objects? First of all, anytime you put something in a person's hand, especially a weighted object, it actually changes the way their body moves, which then in turn changes the way your brain is processing the information, because it's got to take into consideration the object you're working with. But the reason we like to work with weighted objects is because it forces us to control our body and anticipate that point where we would go too far, where we would lose balance, so we learn how to recognize it in the body a microsecond before we get to the point of no return where we lose control. Doesn't mean we are always perfect, no. But the idea is if you don't practice doing things like that, your body doesn't respond the way you want to. Grandmaster Karen, may he rest in peace, he used to always talk about this. And one of the things he used to always say, and I said it in other videos, but I'll keep repeating it, is if you want to do the thing you want to be able to do, you got to practice doing those things or things similar to it. So in Warrior Flow, when we're doing this kind of roll the ball kind of exercise, or we're kind of pushing the ball, these kinds of exercises, what we're doing is we're building a base level of movement or a general level of movement. It doesn't mean in a fight that I'm going to stand there and go like this. No. What I'm doing is I'm coordinating from the ground up, feeling my legs push back against the ground, feeling myself control my equilibrium as I go back and forth, so that as I'm moving and throwing strikes in here, whatever I'm doing, I'm just not all over the place. Even if I'm throwing strikes that look like haymakers, there's a level of control in there where it allows me to adjust. Like one of the other exercises I like to do, and that is the dry land swim. And this comes right out of the Tai Chi manuals. I mean, I'm not saying anything that people haven't done. And what the dry land swim does, I find, is, especially for people who've never thrown a punch before or don't really know how to strike and get their body behind it, is it forces them to move their entire body, where they're not just all doing it by their arm. And then it teaches them how to not get so far forward that they lose control of their body. And as you're doing the dry land swim, all I'm thinking about as I'm doing this is, as I'm moving, feeling the coordination and control within my body, so if I gotta punch somebody in the throat, I can do so and do it with power and the confidence of knowing my whole body is behind it. Other things I like to do to develop my body, and that is developing the ability to not just drop hit, but also as I'm dropping in, developing that timing where the drop becomes so intuitive that it's just a part of the movement. One of the things I do is I'll take the board and I'll just get in front of the heavy bag. And what I'll do is, as I step up on the board, first get this feeling of where I want my body to be, and then I start striking. And as I'm striking, whatever strike I'm going to use, and I just start adding power to it. The idea behind that is, as I'm drop striking, I'm now coordinating my body and learning how to control my equilibrium. So when I have to step forward or step fast, I'm already planting my feet and positioning myself where I need to be to make it work. In other words, it's like hitting baseballs. A baseball player doesn't get up there like this and then just swing. No, he positions himself where he needs to be in the batter's box, and he already brings the bat where it needs to be, so that when the ball comes, all he has to do is swing. So I'm kind of trying to do the same thing here, whereas by the time my foot lands, where I have complete control of my equilibrium, all I have to do from there is follow through and hit. And then as time goes on, I build up power, etc., etc. So I do a lot of things like that within my training to help develop my body. And, when I'm doing them, I'm not getting crazy about it. While I'm focused on what I'm doing, so I don't even hurt too, I'm also not getting crazy. I'm also looking for the feedback. So if I'm stepping up here, I'm saying, yeah, I'm a little off there. Yeah, I got to really get my body over. I learn how to correct myself as I go along. So I don't look at things when they go wrong in training as failure as I do feedback. And I think that's a good way to look at it. Other things I like to do is work on timing and coordination. So I'll take something like, just a kettlebell. And one of the things I like to do is holding it in the same spot and shifting back and forth, feeling myself transition. The reason I like doing this is because this is one of those tool replacement things, whereas as I'm moving in on people, my body, as it's transitioning and moving around things or even hitting things out of the way, that my hands are not, again, flopping all over the place. And I'll cover that a little more understanding when I start talking about subtle muscle control. The point is, by learning how to control my body, by learning how to control my equilibrium, then when I do things, whatever they are, whether it's just getting my hands up to protect my head, getting my hands in a position to protect my eyes or my throat, or just diving in on someone, or whatever the case may be, the last thing I have to worry about is coordinating my body in a way where I'm not going to be falling all over the place for the most part. Or if I step on the ground and it's uneven, I can quickly learn and teach myself how to recover. And these are important things that you should be thinking about in your training. I don't care what you do. I don't care whether you grapple, kickbox, box, whatever the case may be. Whatever you're doing, you want to look at those things that you do. And you want to look at the essence of what it is that makes it work within the laws of physics and human physiology. Another thing I do, and people have seen me do this, is I like to use these weighted balls to do all kinds of stuff with it. And one of the things I do is similar to what I was doing with the kettlebell, is I like to go back and forth. But I also like to move around the ball, trying to hold the ball in the same spot, bringing my hands around, doing different things. And what I'm doing is I'm just developing timing. I'm just developing timing and coordination. What I'm also doing is using the ball in my training to distract me on purpose. What do I mean by distract me? As I'm moving and throwing punches or strikes, whatever I'm doing, what's also taking place is I got to compensate for the ball. So I got to position my body in the right place at the right moment to be able to catch the ball. Then I go, I'm just going to do this lightly so you can hear what I'm saying. Then I do the same thing, working on the bag, trying to keep the ball in the same spot, throwing some kicks in it, whatever I'm going to do. And what I'm trying to do is develop my body that as I'm moving and doing things, basically from a mental standpoint, while I understand, yeah, I'm doing a drill, at the subconscious competence level, in the cerebellum and all that good stuff, my body knows what to do without me having to think about it. You know, remember, the whole intent is to train yourself to the subconscious competence level where you don't have to think about your body. I think a lot of times when people ask me, you know, what do I do in this situation? Or what do I do in that situation? Well, the truth of the matter is pretty much almost anything you do, if you do it explosively with ruthless intention, it's probably going to work. Because remember, the other person you may be dealing with, they got to assume that you can do something. Otherwise, they're not necessarily paying attention to it. And so it gives you kind of an edge if somebody's trying to attack you and you attack the attacker, as you know, Professor Bradley Steiner used to always say with the World War II combative stuff. I like that. So as I'm practicing these things, I'm just thinking about how can I move my body in the most efficient manner possible to do whatever it is I feel I need to do. When I'm throwing strikes, and people have said this to me, I notice when you throw strikes, you don't really do anything fancy. Yeah, I don't. You know why? There's only so many things you can do with your hand. So if I'm throwing a chop, that's all I'm doing. If I'm doing a spear hand to the eyes, that's all I'm doing. If I'm doing a palm strike, that's all I'm doing. You find these things in pretty much every martial arts system. You know, even the grappling arts, when you start talking about atemi, right? Softening, open-handed strikes. They do these things, you know, sweeps with the heel, all these things. They're all a part of this fighting. The hard part is getting people out of this mindset that they gotta always have a technique, and that it's not the technique that makes it work, it's you that make technique work. You know, there's only, again, so many things you can do with your hands and only so many things you can do with your feet. So as I practice these things, I'm focused on how do I develop my body to be able to respond the way I want it to respond, or at least to a high degree, because, you know, as we say in the military, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall back to your level of training. And trust me when I tell you, you know, that is a crucial thing to understand in your training. Now, when I talk about subtle muscle control, the thing I want people to understand is subtle muscle control is not a lack of using force or structure or creating structure. I think that's a big mistake, you know. So when I'm being loose and relaxed, right? Looseness or being loose is only one element of subtle muscle control. When I'm actually using subtle muscle control, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to relax my muscles as much as possible so that the muscles are accessible to me when I need to use them. So for example, if I'm throwing a chop, obviously, you know, my triceps, you know, my posterior deltoids, obviously my hand when I'm throwing a chop has to create structure, and that structure actually goes all the way down to my feet with the kinetic chain. Obviously I got to do those things, right? But here's the thing, from here to here, what I don't want is I don't want to be stiff and rigid. The reason is the more unnecessary tension I create, the harder it is to make that work, and it's actually putting the brakes and pulling back on what I'm trying to do. This is something that Grandmaster Perkins used to talk about all the time. This is why he used to always tell people, relax your bicep. Why? 9 times out of 10, when your arms feel stiff, your bicep is already contracted, and so now you have nowhere to go. But if the bicep is relaxed, you get that snap in there. So you want to find that balance. When I'm doing stuff, sometimes people who work with me, they do feel me resisting them with structure and force. Why? Because you got to use your muscles. You know, it's kind of like when you're sprinting, for those who've ran track. No matter how fast you run, you know what I'm talking about. You never feel like you're running fast enough. Even though you're trying to relax and do all the breathing stuff your coaches told you to do as much as possible. The reason for that is because your muscles are expanding and contracting as fast as they can. And in between there's a relaxation going on. But it's happening so fast, you just feel like you're, you know, like you're tight the whole time, but you're not. A lot of times when I've run good 40 times when I was playing football, a lot of times I felt like, I was running with like 2 cement blocks on my feet, and I've gotten some of my best times simply because while I was relaxed, it was actually allowing me to get a little more force, a little more energy, a little more speed and power out of my body. So when we're talking about being loose, we're really talking about subtle muscle control. So when I have people do these exercises, like rolling the shoulders, like they're rowing the boat, I'm not telling you to do that because you're going to be fighting like Saturday Night Fever, like you're dancing. No, I have them doing this so that these muscles, you learn how to move them, how to access those muscles. So when I got to bring my shoulder up to protect my neck, the last thing I need to be worrying about is being able to do something like that efficiently. It's a very natural thing, but why not develop the muscles to do what the muscles were designed to do? When I'm being fluid and relaxed in the body, I think of myself just like a running back in football, right? A running back doesn't run like this. He's got a certain fluidness to him, or a point guard in basketball, there's a fluidness to their body, but yet it's powerful. And so as they're moving their body, sometimes they make you miss. Sometimes they actually change and lower the boom on you. It all depends on what they feel they need to do. The point is, they are never running like they're stiff. So when we're talking about subtle muscle control, that's the kind of control we're talking about. When we're talking about what we call perceptual awareness, sensitivity, and our ability to feel things is just a part of it. Everybody has a degree of sensitivity. Some people it's better than others, but we all have a degree of sensitivity. This is how we move ourselves through the world. So when we're talking about sensitivity, what we're talking about really is what is a stimuli when you're experiencing it? Whether it's something you visually are seeing, whether it's something you're feeling within proximity, or whether you're something kinesthetically feeling through direct touch or tactile sensitivity. What is it that you're experiencing? And what is it you're experiencing on the inside of the body? Because all those things are actually going on simultaneously. Whatever it means to you, that's what's going to influence the decision you make. So if I feel somebody pushing against my hand, I have the same information they have in that moment. I feel them pushing, and I know where their hand is. And if I'm pushing back, it's because we both have the same information. Nothing says I can't slip my hand around and hit them, but nothing says I can't leave it there while I move my body to a better position to prevent them from doing something with their hand that I don't want them to do. The point is, by playing off of what I'm experiencing, I get to make those choices. So when we're talking perceptual awareness, or some people in Warrior Flow, they call it perceptual cognition, I like that too. There's a thought process to it, but it's not a thought process where we're sitting there, writing it out. It's a thought process that becomes an embodied cognition or embodied perception, whereas we just know things in the body without necessarily knowing, if that makes sense. So when I'm feeling things, when I'm perceiving things, even at a distance, there's this thing called visceralization, where I can actually still, in my mind's eye, feel whatever it is. I know this is metal, I know enough not to hit this with my bone because it's metal and it hurts, and not that that's ever happened before, right? And I know that this is leather. I know what all these things are because I've touched them before. So in my mind's eye, I already know what this feels like. I know with this kettlebell, it's got some weight to it. I've picked it up before. So I know in my mind's eye what this feels like before I even touch it. As a part of visceralization. And then of course, if we were actually touching something, then you can actually feel it directly. But also there's the other aspect, and that is the interoception. How I'm feeling, what it is I'm experiencing internally. I will tell you, even through visceralization, the decisions we make in the body actually happen internally before we do anything externally, if that makes sense. In other words, I perceive this, but the decision of whether I'm going to hit this with force or not, how my body is doing that is an internal process as I'm positioning myself, because I can feel internally how my body's moving. So when we're talking about perceptual awareness, we're just talking about this perception, this understanding in the body of what things mean based on how we experience them sensorially. That's all we're talking about. The culmination of all that stuff coming together, that's the dynamic coordination. And the dynamic coordination is basically when all three of those are working together, which they all work together anyway. It's allowing you to make decisions in the body on the subconscious competence level, depending on how well you've trained yourself, to where you don't have to think about it. So whatever it is you do, whether you want to throw punches, whether you want to throw, palm strikes, whether you want to grab somebody and hip toss them and plant their face into a fire hydrant, whatever it is you want to do, none of the things that I've talked about, take away from it. If anything, it actually adds to it. And so that's why I tell friends, I have friends who do some grappling, they do jujitsu, and I tell them, I say, you should practice with a weighted dummy and get the feel for how you would explosively yank that thing off its feet. So you get that timing now. So you practice those things. You practice, maybe taking something like this and learning how to suddenly turn in different directions, just so you develop those, those neural pathways and those motor neurons to be able to do things explosively. When I practice my speed work, all I'm thinking about is going from maximum relaxation to maximum contraction for a microsecond. But in my mind's eye, I'm thinking of splitting people's faces in half. And I put that visualization in there to ensure that my body follows through. Because the mind and the body, contrary to all these people trying to sell books, the mind and the body work together. There's no such thing as, mind, body, mind connection. It's just you. So as I'm doing all this stuff, as you're practicing all of these skills, I just want you to understand that the sky is the limit of what we can do. Socrates always talked about, how it's a shame for a man to grow old to not see the magnificence of what his body is capable of, or words to that effect. And for those who don't know, Socrates was a war hero. He wasn't just some guy sitting around, pontificating on things, and trying to make himself sound, intelligent. No, he was actually a war hero. He understood this. He understood the importance of not just developing the mind, but developing the body. So hopefully, as I've gone through this, and I'll probably continue on this series showing some different stuff, just really to give people ideas of how they can formulate their own kind of training based on their own body type and what they feel they need, or what their biggest weaknesses are that they feel, so that they can improve themselves. Just remember too, everything I'm showing you here is just a concept. It's just an idea based on how the human body does stuff. And the sky is the limit. You want to be as creative as you possibly can. The more creative you can be, the more things you're going to discover about what you can do. Because none of us knows what we can do until we got to do it. And you don't know what you can do until you do it. You don't know what you don't know until you know it. It's just that way. So hopefully you got something out of this. I'll probably keep up on this part of the series of stuff I like to do, because people always ask me about these things all the time. And, it's just only fair that I kind of present and put these things out there. Hopefully you got something out of this.